There we go.
There you go.
All right, I think we should just sort of get started. So for everybody at home watching online, aka Dave Anderson, thanks for coming to the second Meet the Candidates event. These two gentlemen, I'll let them introduce themselves, but they are candidates for the third position on the board of directors at the Artisans Asylum, the member position. And yeah, without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself? Start over here.
Sure. Mike Middleton. I've been a member for a little over 5 years. Joined in order to get access to the shop bot and mostly wood shop, basically the dirty things, the wood shop, the metal shop. And I have been on the transition committee since I was on the transition committee, been on the IT committee, and I am the shop lead in training.
I'm Matt Ewing. Came to Artisans to use the CNC machines, the shop bot in particular, and plasma cutter. I've been a solid member for 1.5 years, but I was a member in 2013 and I was a member in 2018 as well. And it's always been on my list to be at Artisans, whether I'm circumstances, whether it's location or money, has prompted me to do so steadily until 1.5 years ago. So now I'm here.
Awesome. So I have a couple questions here just to sort of judge this conversation. But I also want anyone else here that wants to, ask anything, or anybody on Zoom, aka Dave, wants to ask anything, feel free to just let me know. But I thought we could start by just talking a little bit more about your initial experience joining Artisans Asylum. And we can maybe just start, we'll do the opposite, maybe Matt and then Michael. But your original experience joining Artisans, what was it like? How did you find that process? Was it easy to join? Was it hard to join? Did you feel welcome? Did you find things easy or hard in any particular way? Just what was that?
So I guess I've joined Artisans 3 times. Like I said before, the first 2 times unsuccessfully. I would say the real holdup with me keeping my membership, which I think is an important part that we should focus on, as a community right now, is tool testing, the accessibility to tool testing, and just the community vibe in general. I just back then I might have been coming in off hours, but it was a little empty, and there wasn't a community like there's definitely a community here right now. When you come in, at the right time.
And was that at this building?
No, that was in Tyler Street. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But all in all, you found it easy enough to access the community and the space and.
Tool testing is always. I think getting people hooked involves giving them the keys to the castle, right? So I think you got to make a concerted effort as a new member to get joined up to the shops. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So it's all about tool testing, shops, streamlining that process. That's sort of the thing that's on your mind.
Yeah.
Cool. Mike?
Yeah, when I joined, we didn't have an ED. I never did a new member anything. I got tool tested on the wood shop, and I got tested and trained on the shop bot. And then I just sort of like noticed things. I was shocked to discover that there was a new member orientation a couple of years later, because I'd never gone through it.
Okay.
So yeah, I basically just sort of like went with the vibe. I think in terms of the community at that time over at Tyler Street, it seemed like there was regular events, but they were always in the evening, and my kids were smaller then, and evenings weren't good for me.
Yeah.
And so I was mostly a daytime user, and it felt like I was sort of an outsider because I was a daytime user. But if you were an outsider because you were a nighttime user, then
yeah,
maybe everybody was an outsider.
Yeah.
I just assumed it was because I was daytime and I couldn't make the evening events that seemed always like there was like a regular, like a beer thing, I feel like, or some social nights.
Definitely beer things.
Yes,
Yeah.
social nights that I could never make. And so, yeah, my integration was slower because I basically just started meeting people in the different shops and started talking to them, and discovering that they were the shop lead for that shop. So there was no kind of like orientation, and also because I didn't take a class, I did some private training. Yeah, and I think, looking at what it takes, I mean, like I'm trying to get new members all the time. I sent an email out, actually just got an email from someone who's interested in joining, and I have to say, like, well, you have to get tested on every tool, but like, yes, $200 gets you access to every tool that you've been tested on.
Right.
And then, good luck with that.
$240 now.
Yes. And at that point, actually, there was no scheduled way to even get tested in the wood shop. I sent an email and I sort of was chicken and egging it for a while. Like, why would I join when I can't use the tools and I
Right.
can't seem to get on to find out how to use the tools until I join. But actually, I went through the same thing when we were closed, and I went up to Lowell Makes, and I had the exact same experience, sort of with that chicken and egg. And I think that's just that's kind of par for the course.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Were you a studio renter at that time, or you?
I
Not, right?
I got a studio when they got really cheap.
Yeah.
When we were closing down over at Tyler, and I had one
Okay.
project left to go. And I realized I could really use, I'd been using I had a third of a shelf, then a whole shelf, then two whole shelves.
Piecemeal.
And that's how I did it for a long time, for the first couple of years. And then once they got super cheap, when they were shutting down, and Lars basically said, like, you could have I can't remember what it was, but it was like for the last 3 months that we were over at Tyler.
Yeah.
And then I got a studio space, a small studio space when we moved over here.
Okay. And you both have studios here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess getting a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of the board and how that works. An essential part of being on the board is being part of a committee. Like, the board itself meets once every 2 months. So a lot of the work happens in between those meetings at committees and subcommittees, et cetera, et cetera. Are there any committees that you know about that you'd like to be involved in, or any projects that you think should be on a committee? Like, what are your thoughts about the sort of sub work of the board, if you know any of it?
Well, I have opinions.
Oh yeah, well, let's start with Mike and then go back to you.
So I actually have a question to the question, which
Sure.
is that I know, after Antonio stepped down, we started a whole bunch of committees, but there are committees that are board driven, and then there seem to be some member driven committees, and I can't tell if those are of the same structure, type, drive, right? Most other organizations that I've sat on the board on, the bylaws usually have like specific committees that have to exist. And I think we have a development committee, and I actually don't know what the other ones are. I was going to the development meetings. I went to the first one, and then I didn't realize that I wasn't on the list to get re-invited. So I don't know when they've happened since then.
If it's any consolation, I haven't been to one of those meetings.
Yeah. But my background, I'm very comfortable doing finance work. I don't do asks very well. So I'm not a great marketing person, so I probably would not be the person to be on the development committee as someone who you expect to go out and do the asks. I might have other ideas because I've sort of been around development work, but I don't necessarily have the whatever that skill is that makes people write big checks.
Are there any committees that you know of that you would want to be part of?
I don't know what they are.
Okay. So I guess, to the best of my ability, since I've been on the board, I have learned about governance, finance, development. Those are the big ones.
Yeah.
I think development is also where a lot of the talk about fundraising and marketing happens.
Right.
And I know that there is a steering committee, but that is not a board-led committee. So that would be more of the the member-driven committee, but I believe that was created by our interim executive director in collaboration
Right.
with members. So it's not like a fully member-driven committee, but it was mostly member-driven.
Yeah, so I mean, finance and governance, I have some experience with,
Right.
even though they're not glorious. But
None of them really are.
I always say, good government is boring. And yeah, so.
Awesome. Matt,
Definitely interested in the finance committee.
Finance committee.
Yeah. But I'd also like to start maybe, I pitched 3, but if we get 1 or 2 of those board, I'd love to have more board appointed committees. One for a shops fund. So I proposed, I don't know if you guys saw my email,
Yeah, I read it.
but I proposed a fund called the shops fund, which would be isolated from the budget of artisans, so that shops can be funded through their budget and also through their shops fund. And a committee would oversee that fund, and the committee would be built, be a collection of shop leads so that they can distribute amongst themselves. Because I think we need to give the shop leads the power over some cash flow, even if times are tight.
Right.
I also pushed to the shops lead committee, which would be different. So the shops fund committee would be, just to direct that cash, but the shops lead committee, I think that the shops should be, allowed to make their own staffing and budgetary, budget amongst themselves. Obviously, they get a block of, budget from the board, but to distribute that amongst the shops, because I think they know the what their needs are the best. And I think that decision should be member driven. All the shop leads are members, and they're the hardest working people, that we have around here. And I think they should be given some power to make their own decisions. Third committee, and a second fund. So I also want to make a giving fund. I call it the Makership Fund. And so this is to help people who might not might have extra needs to be able to afford this space, because artisans is expensive, right? Not everybody can afford it. So I'm proposing a fund that externally people can donate. It's an external facing fund. So it also has the advantage of donors being able to just donate to people in need instead of just donating to hobbyists and things like that. And so there would be, like the shops fund, there'd be a committee called the Makership Fund Committee that would award applicants. I proposed 2 years of 100 square foot studio space and scale that to however much donations goes into that fund. So I kind of,
So depending on how much funding there is, if it could cover
right, more
6 months
people.
or a year or 2 people.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have 2-year blocks, but if we had more money than, a 2-year block for 1 member, I think it would be nice to cover more than 1 member for sure.
Awesome.
Like many, that'd be ideal.
Yeah. Have you I did read your proposals.
Thanks.
And they're great. Have you talked to any shop leads about their experience, and like, is this something that has come from you, or is there more of a consensus?
So the shop leads committee, I think I've talked to a lot of shop leads about the shops fund, and I think everybody's psyched about that. Shop lead committee, there's there might be some points that I need to work out, because I don't think they might not want the board directly telling them, giving them direction, right? They might want to buffer the executive director as the buffer. So maybe that one goes back to the drawing board, but yeah, I've definitely reached out to get feedback on that.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I always like to mention to people, and this will be somewhat less relevant to you, but I think future versions of you and me, is that a normal board doesn't do nearly as much work as the work that we do. I'm not kidding when I introduced this election a couple weeks back. To have like a substantial effect, it's minimum like a couple hours a week, if not like 5 to 10 hours a week sometimes. Even just to get this going today, I spent maybe 5 hours like sending emails and like coordinating things, writing down questions. Like it's just everything takes way more time than you think. And normally a board, it doesn't get necessarily so involved because there's a staff and there's more volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. So I think normally having a board involved in a subcommittee that was made up of members that was driving something wouldn't actually be the case. I will say that your position and my position and Scrap's position and Dan, we are, even though Dan is specifically the member advocate, all 4 of us would be these sort of member advocates going back and forth from membership to the board, to the ED, to whoever, as that conduit of information flowing out of the board. So I think what you were writing.
What would you
comment.
say? Would you say a board appointed committee made up of members that aren't members of the board members? Is that feasible, or is that something that is
Say
a
that again?
stretch? So a committee based on shop leads that shop leads aren't on the board.
Right.
That is within their powers in the bylaws, but would you think that'd be a popular
So I think the closest thing to that we have right now is the steering committee.
yeah.
Um,
But that's not is that a board
it's
appointed committee?
it's not board appointed, but I think the question is, if it was an official like board committee, what would be different? Like what do we gain from that? Per
Right.
se? Like the finance committee will put together finance reports, bring it to the larger board meeting, and then we will be informed by that data, maybe vote on whether or not to accept a particular thing, and then we'll act on that.
Yeah.
But I mean, we could do that from an email. We could do that from anything. It's like a working group to like fill in dots and inform ourselves.
Yeah.
Governance, similarly, they reach out, they put together speculations, like perspective, like yearly, like how much money we will raise and what sort of events we'll put together, and like what we can hopefully expect to subsidize some of our income as a nonprofit. Like there's a lot of just putting together data so we can make informed decisions.
Right.
Which is basically what most of the committees do.
Right.
So I think
So I guess making the decisions is what the advocacy, self-advocacy is the part that I'd like to divest from the board, because the board does have so many jobs,
we would like to divest as well.
Yeah.
We'd like to do other things, but unfortunately we would ultimately it's going to come down to like hiring more people to do more work here. Because we just don't have enough staff. It's always been a problem. And that's why the board has always been way more involved than it should be.
Right.
So
I just see the committee as a tool that they could be less involved and more, keep the autonomy to the members.
Yeah. And I guess like a public service announcement here too. I don't know how well advertised the steering committee is. I do go to them occasionally, but they're on Mondays at 3 o'clock.
None of these are properly advertised.
And it's in that room right behind Mike's head, the classroom. But that's where the steering committee meetings are, Mondays at 3. I don't even know if I'm supposed to advertise that. I don't know. I'm assuming it's a public meeting, but
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's something that at the last Meet the Candidates, there was a fair amount of agreement that at least the time, place, and agenda should be public information
of the board.
of things like the steering committee, and I guess there's a communication committee. And if there's
There is
basically
a communication.
anytime
right.
there's a group of people who are getting together to make any kind of decision, what is the process of getting onto that committee? When does it meet, and what's the agenda? And sort of making that a much more public piece of information. Who's on the different boards, committees within the board is a sort of a separate issue, and communication by the board to the board and from the board is probably is I think separate. But if there are groups that are making decisions, then we should at least know who they are, and how to get your voice added to that group. But going back a couple of steps, I think one of the things I mentioned is that this is a strange board, but it's not my first strange board. I was on a board for my children's daycare center, and I had to give the introduction. I was the board president briefly, and I had to introduce how the board works to new board members. And I said, this is a really strange org chart where we are at the top and we're also at the bottom, right? As the customers were on the bottom, and as the board we're at the top, and we hire and fire the staff and the ED, and so you have to be very careful which hat you're wearing when you make those kinds of decisions, because you're wearing two very distinct hats. And board decisions, in theory, the board should be thinking about 3 and 5 year plans and hiring, firing executive staff and approving budgets, not on their hands and knees under desks, tracing network cables. But that's where we are.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of a weird situation, but I think the movement right now seems to be towards much more membership driven decision making, which I think is great, but that requires a fair amount of transparency about how to get involved in that if it's going to be the case.
Yeah.
So it is a bit of a strange and unusual situation.
Yeah. And I can give a little bit of context on that too, as far as the communication from the board to the membership. We have these conversations about what level of communication we should be extending, because we are doing too much. And because the sort of boundaries of like what is relevant to membership is kind of blurry. And then also like what the role of the executive director is and how it's very separate from the board. The executive director actually has most of the power, which is a blessing and a curse, because they will also get inundated with requests to do or not do particular things, which take away from the job that they're doing. And if there was a staff, then that would actually not be so much of a problem, but because there isn't really anyone to direct a lot of the questions at other than the executive director, it ends up being the board often that sort of steps in and gives advice. And we end up getting into some of the nitty-gritty there. But then a lot of that is not really information that's relevant for all of the membership. It'll be like a lot of individual one-off sort of things. So we are involved in things that like we wouldn't broadcast because it's minutia, right? It's a lot of small things. And then the big things that we're involved in, it can be just as problematic as it can be helpful to announce something to the community that is, in the oven. We want to tell you about something when we take it out of the oven and it's at least ready to be seen, if not consumed. And it takes a long time for us to do anything that we're doing, because we meet once every 2 months and we have these subcommittees. And I mean, the email list is not, popping off. It's like people have day jobs and lives.
And
slowly.
it's boards and organizations have inertia, and they have their own inertia. I think one of the things that's I think problematic and pervasively problematic, and I think the board can put pressure down through the entire organization, is just general communication, even from the staff. And so I think what happens is a lot of times most of the information flow is by rumor.
Yeah.
I heard there is a 3-page waiting list for studios. I heard we are 100% booked on studios. I heard we are 60% booked on studios. I heard, the lease was signed, blah, 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 blah. I heard.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely getting in front of that, so that is not the primary way that people are finding out about things. I think needs to happen kind of at all levels. It doesn't have to be like, oh, we're thinking about so-and-so, because you definitely don't. If people don't have a voice, then telling them about a decision that you're not sure about is really just going to frustrate everybody involved.
Yeah.
Because they're going to want to have a voice. But if they don't have a voice, then they're just kind of screaming into the void, and getting very frustrated. And then the people who have to listen to the screaming get frustrated. So that I totally agree on. But the status of various projects that are underway would be great to have sort of regular communication about. I heard that we got a grant that would pay for all the compressor tubing, but we haven't gotten the cash yet, right? I can list the number of things that I've heard, and I'm sure we all can. And that's not terribly helpful.
Yeah.
Because that gets everybody thinking their own thoughts about various things.
So just to push back a little bit on that, whose job is it to announce that? Because that's not necessarily anything the board has anything to do with.
No, that's true, but the board can tell whoever's in charge of operations, whether it's an executive director or a COO, because we kind of aren't in a place where we can actually have a true executive director, right?
Right.
There's just too much operational work to be done. And so, but the board can say, look, this is what we expect to see happening on a regular basis. The same way you're communicating with the board to tell us the status of various grants that you've applied to and where they are. You know, a quarterly email that goes out that says we applied to these grants, we got these, we haven't got the cash yet on these. This is what they're intended to be used
Right.
for,
Right.
to the membership, so they have some idea of what things are happening. And you know, I think there is that is a place where the board can basically set an expectation. They can't force anybody to do anything, and they can't necessarily do it themselves, but whoever's involved in the grant work should be generally letting everybody know on a regular basis. If only to preempt the rumors, if only to get ahead of the rumors, because the rumors are just not helpful.
I think to go back to what you said before, I think at bare minimum, we need all the committees that are involved in making decisions at Artisans and how to join the committees and when they meet. I think that's pretty important. So that if people want to get involved, they can get involved.
The amount of people that have mentioned to me, totally separate from any of these conversations, where's the asylum calendar? Where's a calendar of everything that's happening? And I have no good answer for that. Yeah.
And that would be a full-time job just to manage that calendar,
Pretty much.
because there are a lot of different things happening at a lot of different levels.
Especially now with Eventbrite, and all the different happenings. It is hard to consolidate all that information. Yeah.
It seems that we have a staff of 4 people. And you know,
Who are the 4?
Damien,
Okay,
Alex, Blue, and
Come on.
okay.
that's it. So there is no operations director. There is no someone to keep track of calendars. There's no one talking to all these committees they're meeting or trying to get them to put out minutes, if much less. I don't even think half the committees have agendas. They just meet and go over whatever's currently on their minds. I think the issue probably is more to do with that there isn't money to hire the staff to do any of the things that a normal organization of this size would do. And if there isn't the money, those tasks fall to whoever volunteers. Oh, board members. So I don't know, it seems like the big issue is how do you get enough money in this machine to afford to have these roles filled? And you know, that really comes down to the heart of it, is what model of how this place operates is going to make enough money to keep it going?
I think that's a good question, but it also, I would push back and say I haven't seen any previous model, so I don't know what percentage of our income is supposed to come from donations, what percentage of our income is supposed to come from studio rentals. And it's definitely a chicken and egg scenario, right? Like we need the money to hire the staff, but it's going to be very hard to get the money without the staff to do some of the basic things involved in, you know, anything from fundraising to, you know, arranging the classes to, you know, it's a very, we're stuck in a bit of a cycle. And in my experience, nonprofits go through this all the time. And what they always do is they lay off their development staff, and then they just pray for an angel to come and drop enough cash in their lap to fix it. And I've never quite understood that approach.
Plus, if you're dependent on outside people gifting you money to stay in business.
Yeah, but I mean, what I've seen over and over again is you, when times get tight, you get rid. The one thing you can get rid of is things like marketing and advertising and development and the things that bring in the cash. What you can't get rid of are the operational positions. that just keep the gears rolling. And
Yeah.
so unfortunately, because that's what you can get rid of, that's what you get rid of. And then you are really stuck unless, and then you just put your hands together and pray that a fairy godmother fixes it all. And I, 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 I understand how organizations get in that, and we've gotten in that, and that seems to be the pattern that I've seen at a lot of organizations over the years. And I don't know that there's a great answer. I think we have a pool of a lot of talented, excited, energized people. And I think that's where things like the steering committee come from. It's like, well, how do we take that energy? But even that energy needs to be managed by somebody and annotated by somebody and, you know, communicated by somebody. And so there's no substitute for someone who has responsibility for a task.
Which kind of goes back to that bigger point about staff.
Right.
Who actually works here?
Yeah.
Who's in charge here? Yeah. So I guess this is actually a good moment to segue a little bit about who is here, staff, membership, board, etc. So as far as inclusion, right? I guess I would ask generally, what are your feelings about inclusion? I'm sure we're all going to be, you know, encouraging of more inclusion. But specifically at the asylum, are we inclusive enough? What ways could we be more inclusive? What does inclusivity mean to you? Maybe we'll start with Matt.
Inclusivity means that feeling when you first become a member and you're just like, what if somebody talks to me? What if somebody yells at me for using a tool wrong? Like that, just anxiety. And to get rid of that anxiety, I think is what we need to do to bring everybody in, because I think we lose a lot of people that first week is my guess. I don't know, that first, month or whatever. But, or even not even joining at all, like taking it to her and being like, hey, this is too expensive or something. So, taking a look at membership, what are our membership goals? Like, how many people are we losing, who first come into Artisans and maybe decide not to sign up, because we have a fantastic facility. So, I don't know if that's super it, but I think shop nights super important. A lot of shops are doing them. More shops need to be doing them. Deskies, your first point of contact. Like, are we doing everything we can as deskies? I know we ask a lot of deskies already, but like, yeah, I don't know. This is sort of like operational stuff that maybe the board isn't like directly involved in, but it's just my thoughts and feelings on that.
Well, I think partially why it's interesting and relevant is because we're also members, right?
Yeah.
Like this particular position that we're in, we're sort of asked to transcend that gap on purpose. So it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to necessarily speak as someone on the board. Your opinion as a member is actually really important.
Yeah.
So it sounds
I
like
think
you're
new
talking
members, new members is focusing on them, because they've reached out to us to they want to spend money here.
Yeah.
We want to keep them there. So doing everything we can to do that.
This sounds like you're talking a lot about the sort of first point of contact.
Yeah.
Being as welcoming as possible.
Right.
How we engage people that first, second.
Correct.
Or day or week.
Yeah.
I think there are ways in which we are a very inclusive community. I think in terms of things like gender expression, we're one of the more inclusive communities, which I think is great, especially given that the shops could be very gender divided based on their background. But we have some ways to go in terms of the broader community and the community that we are physically in, and making some connections to that community. I had broached the idea actually a while ago, back when there was a transition committee, similar to your idea of the makership, of just having one studio that's for an artist in the community that wants to work on a project, and they get a 1-year membership and access, because access to the people is a huge value, just being able to talk to the people who are here. On the other side, there are barriers to our inclusivity that are completely out of our control. There are like general cultural barriers. There are financial barriers. Even if you don't have the money, having the time is going to be a huge barrier, right? So having the free time to come and hang out here and learn stuff and do stuff. I don't know that, I know most of our classes are in the evening and sometimes on the weekend. I don't know that that is, I don't know if that is perfect in terms of bringing in the broadest possible audience of different types of people who are working at different times of day. But, you know, but let's be frank about what the broader community expects and what our culture thinks about this kind of stuff, right? And it's not, culturally, it's not everybody, right? There are, I mean, I went to art school, and I used to get into these arguments at Mass Art with some of the undergrads where they would say, well, I just want to be a starving artist. And I would say, well, the problem with that is starving artists stop making art, right? And then they have to go do something else. So that's problem number one. And problem number two is, you know, you can afford to be poor. And not everybody can afford to be poor. Some people need to send money home to their parents to help them out with rent, right? Like the option of being able to like not have enough income or to, you know, live in your car is not available to everybody, because there are people depending on them even when they're only 16 or 17 or 18 years old. And so let's be honest about who that option is available to, because it's not universal. And so that's going to be a barrier that's outside our control, that is outside our doors, that is outside of everything. And so I don't know, as we can do our best, but it's still like, you know, the maker community in general is a cultural subset of America. And I'd love to see it change, but I don't know how it changes. I was a gymnast in the 80s. And when I look at like who the national team is today, I'm totally gobsmacked, because that is not what gymnastics looked like 40 years ago. I don't know how that happened, but it's really cool that it happened. But the barriers to people of color getting into a sport like gymnastics were much more complicated than whether or not the gym was a friendly place. There was just much more structural stuff going on. And so we can do what we can do, but there are bigger structural issues that are going to be completely outside our control.
Yeah, I guess that adds an additional level of what responsibility do we have to be inclusive, right? And to what degree? So if you could both maybe speak a little bit more too about like the responsibility that we have for inclusiveness to, you know, whatever community that we're, and you can also, you know, add on to that, like what community are we talking about? Like what is making? You talk about 40 years of gymnastics. I mean, we've had what, a decade of making, maybe 15 years. You know, the Asylum is one of the oldest maker spaces, and
Right.
you know, we're looking at like 14 years, something like that. So
I think we can make some outreach to the direct community that's right here. There is a very, we're in Alston, we're next to Brighton. There's a lot of diversity in our neighborhood. I think there are a number of responsibilities we have to reaching out to the neighborhood, and not just to the private schools that can afford, you know, a couple of grand to you know, come and hang out with us for a weekend. I think there are things that we can do that don't cost cash money. They cost the other thing that we have a lot of, which is expertise and time. And so we can line up with what we have in abundance, with what we're able to do with that we have in abundance. A 50 square foot studio is, I think, in my mind, like kind of a no-brainer. Like that should just be done. And I think we can just as easily, regularly try to set up events, kind of like the Fix-It Night or Hack Nights, and specifically reach out to the people who are around us in the neighborhood that were around us, because we're going to get a much better relationship we're gonna do more for the community that we're in by actually interacting with the community that we're in, rather than, you know, hiding from it or armoring our walls and putting up extra security cameras to make sure that those interactions are just the ones we want to have.
Yeah, and it's a good point about security cameras too, because, you know, acknowledging the neighborhood that we're in, you know, there's a very diverse community here. And there are some people that we want to walk in the front door, and there may be some people that we don't want to walk in front of. So, it's definitely complicated for us that wants to be inclusive. So yeah, do you have any thoughts about the sort of specific approach as far as inclusivity or communities?
I haven't given it too much thought to it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
that's
yeah.
it.
I mean, I think in general, the idea of being inclusive and just, you know, welcoming in a wide net,
Yeah,
and then creating systems to support that, I think is helpful.
yeah.
Um,
I think we're representatives of the maker movement in Boston as a whole. Like,
Yeah.
we're the biggest maker space for sure. Maybe even the Northeast. I don't know. I haven't really looked up this.
the workshop out in Worcester would challenge us.
Is that
I talked to
uh?
Randall about it.
Oh,
Yes,
dang!
but,
Nice.
we are pretty big though.
Yeah, but being more involved in the community, of course. Like, I don't know. You know, every event in Boston, like, we should be there representing our team colors, you know, and bringing people in.
Yeah.
I think that would go a long way.
I would go back to, like, what are the organizations that have successfully done that? And what can we copy from them? And what are the organizations that have successfully done that, and what can we team up with them? So an example I'll give is the Pittsburgh Arts Museum.
Yeah.
Nick DePasso became the director, and he said, you know what? More than 50% of the people in Pittsburgh, Spanish is their first language. We're going to change all of our wall text to be Spanish first, and then English second. And that's a way of saying, you know, we're here for this community. And he's, you know, 10 years later, they're building some artist housing and some living spaces, and you know, that's a long slog. But I think what he did just with the language was a huge way of just acknowledging where you are and what's going on around you, and saying, you know, if that's the case, if we want these people to come in, then why is it English only, or even English first? If the people who are within 5 miles of our front door are mostly speaking Spanish, then our text should be in Spanish. And, you know, I don't know, there have to be some other organizations, Artists for Humanity, that have done a lot, right? I know we have a relationship with them, but the question is, like, what, you know, what can we learn? What can we steal? What can we collaborate on?
Interesting bit of information. Austin Brighton is one of the largest Asian American communities in Boston. And I think we have yet to do pretty much any outreach to that community. Something like, you know, like the third largest or second largest in Boston. It's pretty significant. Yeah, so I guess one of the notes that I wanted to bring up too, as far as inclusiveness, but maybe just as a general comment, you know, thinking about what role artisans plays in the community, whatever community we're speaking about, and thinking about how things like the cost of membership, cost of a studio, and even on some level, like how people are using their studios. You know, you walk around the buildings and you'll see a lot of empty studios, but a lot of them are being paid for. You know, what responsibility do we have as members and as an institution to have affordable studios, but also to have occupied studios, and have affordable membership, but also have members in the building, right? Not just paying the bills, but also adding to the community.
So I've given some thought to this. I think there is a cost associated, or you know, a financial detriment associated with people who rent studios but aren't using them. I think that costs artisans money. But what also, you know, the remedy to that would be to, like, maybe have studios, people who rent studios, put a chunk of time in every month, you know, to helping infrastructure and artisans, and, you know, the community coming to shop nights and stuff like that would count towards it. But then the cost of administering that, would that outweigh the cost of, you know, the part that's detrimental to the community?
you're talking like a mandatory volunteer.
A mandatory yeah,
That's actually
voluntoldism.
volunteerism.
Yeah,
That's not that uncommon in co-ops
yeah,
or other sort of institutions. Some cooperative market supermarkets. You know, you might pay a membership fee, but then you're also required to do 3 hours a month, 3 hours a week, just to be part of that process. It's actually pretty common.
I'd like to button up financial things that would definitely help artisans, which is 90% occupancy in studios. I don't think we have that right now. And set a membership goal, so the amount of members that we are shooting for.
Right.
Because I calculated that we might have like 70 members outside of studios right now based on our income of 2023.
Yeah.
Probably have more than that right now since it's, we're coming to the end of 2023. But if we just have, maybe 200 members, that's like $600,000 in the bank, where we're making like $200,000 on member,
Yeah.
non-studio members.
I
So
I will say, and again, this is a communication problem, but our finances are being evaluated, and
Yeah.
even at our last meeting, the numbers that we thought going into that meeting were different than the numbers that we got at the end of that meeting.
are we looking better?
Yeah, actually.
Oh,
I mean, I
awesome.
can't give too much of an update just because I don't entirely understand.
Yeah,
how.
yeah.
But the last meeting that we had was actually really optimistic, and we're not like white knuckling it on the edge of a cliff. We're
Yeah.
more like sitting on the cliff and dangling our feet and like looking,
Oh, nice.
but like we're sitting.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm afraid of heights, so I don't think it's gonna fly.
Yeah, we're close to the edge, but we're not gonna fall. Not right now.
Skydiving?
I am.
It's really-
Afraid of
Um,
heights.
Yeah, it's common.
Yeah.
I actually don't remember the original question.
It was just sort of generally about like the cost of admission here,
Oh.
the fees of studios,
Yeah.
occupying the studios.
Oh, okay,
And
so,
honestly, and just to add on to this, I'm glad you mentioned that. Really, just the cost of having people pay for a membership and pay for a studio and not being.
I would say, I am more concerned about people abusing the spaces, the common, I mean, this is a common space.
Mhm.
And I have people talk to me, have heard me say this 100 times. Public parks are public parks, and they're similar, they're common space. And I have a rule with all common spaces, which is you can do whatever you want in this common space, as long as it doesn't keep me from doing whatever I want in this common space. Right?
Right.
So you want to sleep in the park, you can sleep in the park, but you got to have your stuff out in the morning so I can play in the park when you're done sleeping in the park. I don't care if you sleep in the park, people have sleep in the park for 100 years.
Yeah.
So I get into a tizzy when I see, carts used for storage, tables used for storage, people over occupying spaces, people filling up garbage bins and walking away from a full garbage bin. And I think that comes from, at all levels, just setting even if it's not a 3-hour minimum, it's a cultural standard, which says, what I used to say in the wood shop is you clean up 110% of the mess that you make.
Right.
Right? Like,
Leave it cleaner than you found.
yeah, leave it cleaner than you found it. Never walk away from a full trash bin, right? Like, don't do these things. And honestly, that takes some policing. And it takes some, whether it's public shaming or private conversations, but like someone needs to be walking around and saying, and putting, we have parking tickets. And I sent out a whole email about this when I had a run in with one of our corporate members, right? Like, we have parking tickets, we have status tickets, we have, and if something is left in an occupied state, then what we used to do was take a picture of it, send it to members and say, you got 24 hours before this goes in the garbage.
Can
And
we
so
not do that anymore?
I haven't seen it happen since we moved.
Yeah.
Right, it's,
We were
I'll start
definitely
doing it, you
aggressive.
start doing it.
um,
I've seen parking, like, please move this notices put
Yeah.
on things.
right, but that assumes the person's coming back to see that notice,
Yeah, right.
right? And so emailing it to members, right, and so,
We used to do that in the old building.
right, and so, but that setting up that culture, and that culture has to be pervasive. And if people aren't adhering to that culture, whether an individual member or a corporate member, if someone feels the need to constantly fill up garbage cans and then walk away from them, and you see them doing this again and again and again, like, they need to be talked to. So I see those kinds of behaviors personally more problematic than the person who is paying their rent and never showing up,
Right,
because they're not keeping me from doing what I need to do.
right,
The people who are keeping me from being able to use a shop or a tool because they broke it and didn't tell anybody, or, you know, they left their project on it and
right.
walked away for 2 weeks. That to me is a cultural problem, and we need to do a lot more of setting up the right culture for that. And then, you know, if you want to pay your rent, you know, I don't see that as being the same problem.
Right.
Mostly because most of the people who are showing up are so giving of their time and their knowledge and they're absolutely everything, that like the 5 people who I've never seen, like they're not impacting my life, and they're paying their dues. You know, there was a period a couple of years ago when Laura started, and it was like, holy crap, 30% of our members haven't paid their dues in 18 months. And I was like, why does their fob still work? Like, that's kind of a no-brainer,
That's a,
right?
yeah, we talked about that.
So, you know, those people are a drag, and the people who are over occupying and sort of making it so that no one else gets to use that shop for 48 hours because you just left your stuff everywhere and didn't clean up after yourself. Those people, I think, are, and so there's, I think when it comes to like new member, you know, I because I never went to new member training because it didn't exist when I joined.
Same.
I don't know if that's part of it. You know, I noticed we changed lots of the small. Yeah. Yeah.
As the new member.
Yeah. I'm just saying, I don't know. I'm saying, I don't know. What I can say, what I've seen, which is we switched from lots of small garbage bins.
Very different from Fulton in that respect. I don't see people leaving shit all over in Fulton. So there's something going on at Antwerp where people feel entitled. And I don't know why they feel entitled, but they didn't.
Yeah.
Like
So-
it happens here, but rarely.
We don't,
Possibly, there's just no.
Yeah, that might be it.
Yeah, there's no justice in it.
Like the flex space is always covered in gravel.
and those tend to be,
And I think it's good that people are using it. I want people to use it, but like people come here and use this like this person and they pack it up and leave.
and frankly,
The difference is that they have all the corporate members are over there, not here. And-
well,
And if the
there's a
corporate
couple that,
members, it's not the person who's the lead of the corporate member, I mean, who actually signed up for the membership who's the problem. It's the people who they send in to do the work when they're not there. And that was certainly, I think, the problem with finishing shop and also some of the recycling issues that happened a little while ago.
Yeah.
Because they're not even aware there is an issue.
and the fact of the matter is that it is often the same people again and again, and I don't know. At a minimum, we need to have a cultural thing where everybody feels like they can speak to somebody who is abusing shared spaces. The next level would be that there are people who are around. I mean, maybe it's because you have deskies and deskies are doing some of these things and we don't have the deskies, but you know, but that's that culture of, you know, do a little bit more, leave it a little bit cleaner than you found it. I can still remember the one time I was running late to get my kids, and I literally told Sal on my way out to the wood shop, like, I owe you a cleanup. Right? Like, I gotta run, and I promise, like, I will come in tomorrow and I will clean up like everybody else's stuff, because, and that was my approach to the culture of the space. And so, yeah, I would just say, so, oh, what I was saying about the garbage, right? So we had lots of small bins, and we switched to larger bins, which have signs on them that say, if you see this bin full, throw it away, which is a great step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right, like, that's with corporate members and group members, I think it's always going to be a little bit harder. I think, you know, Freakonomics will tell you, like, when people feel like they've paid what they need to pay, then like they're off the hook, right? Like, I paid my money, so, right. And so trying to figure out how to either change the price so it's actually painful, and so they actually behave the way they need to behave, or change the culture so that it's culturally unacceptable.
So maybe just a hypothetical, one of the ideas we've been tossing around, one of these board conversations, where actually this might even come out of the steering committee at one point. There was discussion about creating different tiers of membership, like a volunteer membership where you actually have mandated hours, and like, I paid my money, so I ain't doing anything else kind of membership, where you would pay much more.
It should be much, much more.
Then
Because
how do you deal with the corporate members where the employees who show up to do the work have never been through training, have no concept that there's any issue?
Training if they have a fob. They are not allowed to be here without training. That is people breaking the
I
rules,
know.
which I don't know how you deal with people breaking the rules.
Yeah.
But the rule is your employees must be on a list and they must go through a new member orientation in order to get their fob. If you're.
But they don't get the fob, but the boss gives them the fob, and says, go do this,
But
here's
they're
the
not
fob.
allowed to do that. That is-
Okay,
Right.
who that,
I'm saying
yeah,
they
but
don't
that
do it.
may be the cause of the issues we've been having.
That's it.
Okay,
I guess
Maybe
maybe,
we just need to not have corporate members. I don't know, because like,
Yeah.
it seems like some of them are a problem.
I think,
I think
The-
there's a thing such as firing the people who cause like 95% of problems. It's printed, years ago, it just said, these are the people who call and take up 90% of our call center time, and just like find another phone to. I'm not saying we should necessarily go nuclear, but you know, if there's always the same people, then.
Is, I don't know, it was discussed, just as one example, is there a less than, 24/7 membership, or was that here?
Yeah, there's a.
There is now,
There has been,
okay, but does that, I mean, if they get a key fob, right, and basically they can pay less and come anytime they want, I mean, nobody knows.
oh, if you have a next weekend membership, your key fob will not work.
Oh,
until
just-
6 PM.
Oh, just to keep, okay, that's.
So like, we actually had somebody who signed up for a night and weekends membership, they came at 5:58 and they're like, my fob doesn't work, what happened?
Yeah,
And it was like, oh, it's 1 minute before.
okay, so you do it that way, but still, like, they can piggyback or something like that, and then nobody really knows.
Walk in at
Yeah,
any time.
right, yeah.
And we have to, this entire system is based on the honor system. So if people either have to follow the honor system or we have to like uninvite them, because we can't run this based on a police state. That's not happening. Like we could give out parking tickets maybe, but we can't monitor every single person at all times. At least not personally.
Well, you talked about, corporate just sharing a key fob and just sending anybody over, but that's the kind of thing, whether they know how to use tools or they've been oriented or anything like that.
so, I think this is great conversation. I think it brings up other ideas when we're talking about inclusiveness and who is in the building, who's paying for memberships and what they're paying. If we talk more broadly about the maker community and who can afford to be here, what types of people can be here, we're already encouraging particular, sections of society to come here. And some of those are corporations, some of those are startups. Some of those are people who can just afford to have a studio and a membership and maybe not come in so much, or maybe come in a whole lot. Maybe come in during the day. It's one of the things I like to ask people, like, who do you think can afford in their lives to come here during the day with their time, right? To be here 9 to 5. It's a particular type of person. I happen to be one of those people. There's a lot of people here like that, but it's worth considering. What would you say, in your opinions, is the community that we're encouraging to be here? Like who should we be encouraging to be here? Do corporations have a place here? Should we be doing classes only at night? Should we have classes during the day? Like, how would we even fill those classes? What kind of thoughts do you have on this?
That's hard to say. I do think corporations should be here. I think they should, if they are not contributing enough, I think should have guardrails on that. Like they need to contribute in a social way more, whether it's, attending shop nights or, taking out the trash or something.
So to push on you a little bit, so if they did break the rules, should they be ousted? If a corporate member has a fob and they give it to one of their employees and their employee.
Not arbitrarily, we should have a mechanism that does that. But yeah, I think so, yeah.
so we have detention to go with the demerits.
Yeah.
no, no
Dump
fines.
staff.
Yeah, you get fines, you have to come and do volunteer work.
Right, I was telling somebody about, I had my first boss, chewed tobacco and he would spit into a Snapple jar and leave it on my desk. And I started charging him $20 every time he walked away from my desk with that jar, and he stopped doing it. Right, and I said, you just can't, I could say, please don't, and that's gross, but apparently that wasn't enough. but 20 bucks hurt them enough that it was worth it, right? And so, you know, I think it's a warning. And then it may be depending on your type of membership that we say, look, we're either going to fine you or you need to leave. You know,
Authorized to write those tickets.
I think we have don't we have, I mean, Kamali's operations.
But it's not here, like, all 24 hours.
He's not here 24 hours, but you know, I mean, I think technically anybody could write a ticket and they could email it to Kamal and say, look, here's the scenario,
I think right now
And-
anyone can do a parking ticket.
right? And
You just have to
so
have the ticket.
here's the scenario, and he sees you know, and you email him, and you know, when he sees 3 or 4 with the same person's stuff on it, then you know, then
Maybe it's just the new nest into your one farm.
sure, but that it can escalate either to, like, I'm sorry, you can't be a member here, or you're going to have to pay a lot more. And if you are unwilling to put in the volunteer hours, but you're willing to throw in, you know, triple the cost, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but there's no free rides, right? So we had that, what was it, the Visitors Day. There were a bunch of us who did a lot of work to clean up, to set up, and then there were some people who showed up and got all of the same attention and put nothing into it, right?
Little Red Hen story.
Right. And so, you know, I don't have a problem with that if you put $1,000 in the kitty. Right. And if you're a corporation, I mean, honestly, like I remember when we were in the transition phase, there was this discussion of one contracting company. Someone was like, I can't believe they're going to pay $1,200 for a 100 square foot studio. And I thought,
That's a steal.
that is nothing, right? That is just access to that wood shop for a contractor.
Yeah.
That is nothing. And then they come in and they take over the whole place and no one else can use it. Then that's really nothing, right? Like now they're acting like they have exclusive use. $10,000 isn't enough, right? And so for some, if you have the cash, we'll take your cash to help guide you into the right, as long as you're still within the guardrails.
You know, there's
But clear
Yeah.
rules, explicit rules, clear practices, consistent practices.
So for context, there are maker spaces out there that have corporate members that do pay much more, but that also end up paying for the facilities, end up paying for the shops. So for instance, if we had, you know, a cabinet making company, they might be paying so much that the damage that they're doing on the jointer, you buy a new one every 6 months.
Right.
You know, like that kind of money is coming in. Or
And
maybe they would be responsible for repairing these things.
Right.
Because they need to use them, et cetera. So,
I don't know how many people read Make Magazine, but this last issue
Hmm.
had an interview with a makerspace in somewhere in Europe, and they built a homegrown card swipe method for turning on machines.
all right.
And one, so they could keep track of who was tool tested and then eligible to use the machine, but also so they had an idea of how much use it was getting. And then once they got into financial difficulties, they were trying to figure out, well, why don't we make it so that the more you use the machine, you have to pay for it, and then people, or you had a corporate membership, if you were a heavy user, it was very unpopular. But they came up with a solution, which was everyone gets a certain number of swipes every month. And if you run out of swipes, you can buy another block of swipes. And so this is how the corporate or industrial users ended up paying more without it being something that they didn't feel bad about it.
I agree with the like idea of having if you are limiting something, then
Yeah.
having a set number of like 3, which covers 90% of people, and then just having it taxed for people who are really heavily using makes sense. That's how pottery studios do, or at least my own pottery studio. You got, you know, 50 pounds of clay a month included with your price. And if you wanted to go over that, you had to pay per pound.
Yep.
Now, I don't think we should necessarily be rationing things. I don't think that's where we need to go yet. But, I mean, unless there is something that is getting worn out especially quickly or is heavily utilized, and if you haven't reached the point where it's overutilized, then that's not really.
Yeah, I agree with Julianne. I think most of our shops are underutilized.
Yeah.
The shop that is, utilized properly probably is the wood shop. And everything else could use, more utilization. So I think,
My experience then, yeah.
yeah. I'm against rationing, for sure.
Well, until it becomes right, the issue doesn't.
Point where we're like replacing the stock stuff every 6 months, then yeah, we should definitely talk about that. But if we're not running out of stuff, then
For context, when we were at Tyler Street, there was a point where we were replacing the soft stop like every month. Something like that. It was getting so much that they had posted the cost of a blade and a soft stop like near the machine, so you could see like.
could
what
ante
it's
up.
gonna cost.
that is the one thing we charge for if you throw the break.
But there was, this is something that I've mentioned at some of our board meetings and as a steering committee as well. There was a point at our sort of peak where we had so many classes that members were getting mad that they couldn't use the shop because classes were occupying shops. Which is why it's important to consider that education is not going to solve all our problems, because at some point we will reach capacity and then our members will start getting mad that they can't use the thing that they're paying for, which is access to those same shops. It's not a problem right now, but we don't want to overcorrect. And that's why we have to have a diverse set of students.
Also, the wood shop has solved that by allowing people to work while there are classes, and the jewelry shop installed a bunch of benches so that people can work while there are classes. So there are balancing.
Limiting how many resources can you use for a class. Those are something available.
I mean, certain shops have enough space, some don't, but if
Yes.
there is enough space, then it's really.
It has a lot to do with how much noise people use, because you can't hear any conversation in the wood shop when the dust collector's on and the joiner's on, that's, yeah. You put on your ear protection anyway.
Code of silence.
Yeah.
Everybody goes down.
So I'm gonna switch the conversation a little bit. I love that people are interacting, and by all means, if you have any questions at any point, or if any of the people on the Zoom, if you ever want to reach out and just ask a question, I'm happy to just shut up and let y'all take it. There are currently 3. Yeah.
Oh, Dave left.
But no, we still have Dave Anderson.
Oh,
Up
perfect.
top. It's the other Dave Anderson and Chaz and Abigail. Yeah, but I'm actually curious. So one of the things we've talked about, honestly, forever since the asylum has ever been around, is its nonprofit status and also its member-run sort of ideology. And I guess flat out, how important is it that this place remains a nonprofit as opposed to becoming a for-profit organization? And how important is it to you that the members are actually running this place as opposed to having something like a tech shop or a place where you do just pay a membership and there's a cleaning crew and things maybe work, but you just pay for that?
I think we are appropriately a nonprofit, and I think we should be even more member driven than we are right now.
When you say that, what do you mean? What does that mean?
I don't think Artisans of Tom should bring a profit. I think it provides a service to the community, and I think all those, all of our, delta from our revenue versus our costs should go back into the facility to make the facility better.
Right.
Because I think we provide a real community to the maker movement in Boston, for sure.
And as far as members running the organization,
Oh,
you said that it should be even more member run. So what does that look like?
yeah, like I was saying before, I think there should be board appointed committees that give memberships power to make decisions, because I think decisions are a bottleneck right now, and I think we need to diversify that asset, the decision making power.
Okay. Thoughts?
Definitely nonprofit. I don't really see a place for a for-profit. I don't think the business model would work. So that's just straightforward. As for, I think there's a lot of room for membership involvement. I think there's a lot of energy. But I've been on the IT committee for a year, and that's all members. And the fact that it's all members has not solved our inability to make a decision. It's kind of the opposite. And so if we had staff who were in charge of making decisions and felt empowered to make decisions, I think decisions would be made much more quickly. We don't have the money for the staff. And so I think, you know, there is a huge value in the knowledge and time that people are willing to put in. But it needs to be, you know, so we've got all these committees, but we don't know when they meet. We don't know, you know, who's in charge of taking minutes from each meeting, who's in charge of sending out those minutes from each meeting. If that isn't happening, more voices are good when you need information that you don't have, but I don't think they necessarily speed up the decision-making process.
A little comment on that too. I am actually now the secretary for the board as of our last meeting. I just learned how to make a Bookstack account today. And I'm supposed to be uploading the meeting minutes from the last, I think, like 2 meetings, because our secretary also stepped down. So there's a little gap there, but I will be doing that. It's not going to be as mind-blowing as you hope. I mean, we have a meeting once every 2 months, and it's like they're pretty standard, you know, minutes. But it is part of the puzzle. The other thing is we do have a wiki in the works. There is a whole wiki committee, and it is member driven as far as I know. And I have spoken to them, and they seem like they're cooking. It's very exciting. And I
I'm
think
on the wiki committee.
you're on the wiki committee. So
Yes.
what I've been told is that in January it'll be open for public, like, initial usage. I don't know how much,
Like
but
beta.
sort of what did they say? A soft launch was
Yeah,
the
soft
term
launch,
that Hackworth said.
Yep.
And I'm very excited about that. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm very excited about going back to the wiki. I loved the old wiki. I used to get in there and make changes whenever I could. Healthy changes, good changes. But I think that you know, a lot of what we're talking about is communication. I mean, it's like one of the overwhelming, like, huge deficits that we have here is like a single repository for, like, what does it mean to be a member? Where are all the documents, you know, to use this machine? Like, when is an event happening? What does that event mean? Et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, a little bit of a, like, glimmering, you know, hope in the future.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got to having a wiki to no wiki, but I don't think we should do that again. I think we should just improve what's on there.
Agreed. I wasn't here for that whole chunk of time, but my understanding is, for some reason, someone thought that the wiki wasn't working and we should go to this thing called Bookstack.
I think part of it had to do with we were running it ourselves on our own equipment, and no one was managing that equipment.
Right.
So one of the mantras over on the IT committee is that free things aren't necessarily free.
Right.
Who's going to maintain it? Who's going to keep it up? What happens if the person who knows how to maintain it leaves?
Our old website was on a homegrown server in the building.
Right. And so a lot of those things that seem very cheap in the moment, you know, Nexodus is much more expensive and our badge swiping is more expensive.
Right.
But our old badge system, which had some great features, I don't know who built it, and when it
It
went
was all
down,
homegrown as far as I know.
it was all homegrown. And so homegrown stuff is, nobody wants to maintain stuff. Everybody likes to make stuff.
Yeah.
And if we're not thinking about the maintenance plan, then it really doesn't matter. And I'm pretty sure that's what happened to the wiki.
Yeah.
So I know I've been talking about member-driven decision-making and things like that, but I think a really the where, you know, staff shines is that they're going to be perpetually here to collect a paycheck, and they're
24 hours a day.
incentivized to be here. So I think as many
Not allowed to leave.
tasks that need to be recurrent throughout time as possible should be put on staffs, and maybe other decisions that don't need to be updated in perpetuity can be dealt with other people.
That's a great point, and I think not just to you, but to every member of the community, I encourage you to think about what kind of stuff you would want to hand to a volunteer versus staff. We have gone through this many times over the last 10+ years of people leaving with important information or access to something, and we just have to start over.
Well,
Yeah,
that can just as easily happen with staff.
it can. depending on how it's done, it can be made
It's less
harder.
likely.
It's less likely. Um,
I don't know.
well, I'm saying it's like literally, we've had times where documents were made in like a Google account that wasn't ours.
Right.
So like that person just left and took everything, not even maybe on purpose. It's just like they disappeared. Whereas if it's on our server, if it's on our account, then they can't do that. You know, there are ways to prevent stuff, but haven't necessarily had the bandwidth to create those systems. Yeah, any thoughts, any questions out here? Any burning ideas? No? Okay, this is this is sort of a general question, but and we've talked about it a little bit. But if there's one thing or one category of things that you could talk about that bothers you the most about the asylum, like just something that like, wow, what would it be? And you know, speak as freely as you feel comfortable.
I don't know. I love the asylum. I don't really have a thing. It is what it is. It's a makerspace. It's a huge makerspace, and you know, I don't know. I've got nothing.
Okay.
Everything's good until I can't do what I need to do because somebody broke it, left it unusable, left their stuff in the way.
Yeah.
And so that's what drives me crazy is that kind of stuff is these are all shared resources. And if you don't view them as shared resources, if you don't treat them as shared resources, they're not there for everybody. And so, you know, I met somebody when I first joined Artisans and he was like, oh, I hated that place. Everything was always broken. And I don't know specifically, but always broken hasn't been my experience, but frequently unusable. Not frequently, but enough times when I'm under my own crunch, that someone else's thoughtlessness is really getting in the way of my ability to do what I need to do. So that's my bugbear here. That's my bugbear. All the places, you know, the gym, right? It's the same kind of situation, right? We're all in this together, and if you don't see that, then we're gonna have a conversation.
I take the opposite stance. I see a lot of tools that are well loved. Like some of them, like a lot of them have names. Everybody knows where they came from, who donated them, and like you know, when they're out off service for, you know, a while. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that, but I see a lot of well loved tools and well used tools, underutilized, but I think everybody I think we have a set that people appreciate.
I think you can both be right in this sense because I've experienced both of what you're saying. Yeah. Looking at the chat, I just want to shout out that Chaz said that shop leads are getting more power and control, and that these shops will run even better. I don't know I don't know if that's I don't know. We can
Right?
we can substantiate that claim.
Now we just need another shop leads meeting that we haven't had in a year.
Yeah. Interesting point. Are there shop leads meetings?
There were.
There were.
They stopped.
Well, I think all the meeting stopped when Sophie left. Well, I don't know who ran those, but like, I mean, we've just been, like, the staff has been totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, we haven't had any
And
member services.
a lot of things happen.
Do you have any insight on how we're doing as far as the member services roles going and or the
I have
executive director?
I have a little limited information about member services and maybe a little bit more about the ED. As far as member services, we did interview some people and none of them took the job. No, I think some people we were looking at offering and they had other opportunities. I think maybe one person maybe got an offer and it just didn't happen. I think part of it is due to the limitations of what we can afford. Just flat out, we're not paying the most for our positions because we just don't have that much to pay. At least that's my understanding of it. As far as the executive director, our plan right now is to hire a 1-year interim executive director to replace Damien. And we're trying to do that as soon as possible, so it's before Damien leaves, so there can be some knowledge transfer. Which is also complicated because it means we're kind of going to try and get someone. We're on the holidays, which is like a hard time to do this anyway.
Also the mythical man month, you know, you gotta train and also do the job, right?
Right. Yeah, there's nothing easy about any of this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I think some of what we're running into right now. So I guess I'll speak for myself, not as a member of the board, but just my own opinion. I think that all of the jobs that I have seen this place have, all the people doing all the jobs, like everyone that's supposed to be here, they've always been doing a little bit of everyone else's job in some way, shape, or form. Like none of the job descriptions have been like clearly, this is exactly what you should do, and this is exactly how you should be working with your colleagues. And I don't think it necessarily needs to be like sectioned out that much, but the overlap has gotten over the years, it's just gotten so messy. Every time someone goes away, someone has to absorb a little bit of their job. And it gets to the point where with no real management, no real oversight, people are just sort of doing whatever they feel like is most important to them. People are self-triaging.
Well, this was something that Antonio was on, that people had jobs that had lots of qualitatively different parts. It wasn't so much they were doing different things in different areas, but they were very different kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
rather than being able to focus on one kind of work, you know,
Right.
even though it's different parts of the organization.
I mean, not only does it make it hard for people to do their jobs, it makes it hard to evaluate whether or not they're doing their jobs or how well they're doing their jobs, because
Sounds like it would be hard to train the next person too.
it's extremely hard to train people to do what we do here. And also because the systems have changed every 2 to 3 years.
And it burns people out. That's the other thing.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, but that's part of what's happening is, right, we keep having a shortfall of labor, so we keep burning people out because they're doing 15 other jobs, so then they're triaging to do, you know, this part of someone else's job, and maybe something they originally were supposed to do falls through the cracks, but it's because they were putting out fires somewhere else. So I don't think that, like, I've never seen anyone here being like, I'm just not gonna do work, like, everybody's working, but it's just a question of like, there's so much to do and there's not enough to do. And like, you know, I've seen this at other organizations, I've seen this at universities, you know, like if you have where you have sort of cascading failure where you keep losing people because they keep burning out. So we have to have a little bit more staff on this stuff.
Yeah.
And we have to have more concrete responsibilities where there are volunteer groups that are trying to take on a certain responsibility. Like there was supposed to be a volunteer group that was going to be doing cleaning, and I don't know what's actually happened.
Well, I guess my comment would be it's because it's being led by a volunteer.
Right. Well, but I mean, like, you know, then make it a volunteer position with like hours and
Mm, yeah,
membership.
I think it is. I mean, I
Right,
think
but
that person already gets it,
doing it, then get someone else. There's lots of people who want free membership.
but whose responsibility is to get someone else?
Well, that's something you need to define.
And that's the thing we run into. Like, you know, I've said this before. It's not an easy job. There's a lot of work to be done, and honestly, if you want to be effective, you have to do even more than you thought you wanted to do or were available for. I know some people decided not to run for this position just because they didn't want to put that much time into it. So, it is important to have like healthy expectations, healthy goals. You know, I think we're all trying to support each other. And we do have, I will say this, we have 6 new people that were just nominated and elected to the board by the board. So we have, as of right now, I think we have a 15 or 16 member board. And all those new people are very excited. And all the interviews I had with them was very clear. However much time you think you're going to put into this, we want more. You're going to need more if you're going to actually have an impact. But it would be nice to get to a point where there are volunteer lead positions that had accountability and that would be consistent, you know, longer term.
Well, I mean, we have the Nestle, right? So for the most part, that existing works. So it's a question of just finding a way to create a structure.
My understanding is there was a Desky lead. And that person stepped down a couple months ago.
Yeah, but we've replaced.
And
Well, there's a, yeah.
Sun
there's an
Young is the
interim.
new leader.
is the interim.
I don't know if she's official or not, but yeah, she's doing it. Supposed to.
So, I mean, that right there would be like yet another sort of place where we could, if we could solve that problem, then that person could maybe help us utilize the deskies. But for instance, the staff and the board, it isn't necessarily our purview, but also we don't know how to utilize that system. It's not like I don't know how to go to the deskies and be like, I would say the one example is with this campaign, with the election, like even just figuring out how to utilize the deskies, having conversations with Pace, who is the election commissioner. I'm the candidate advocate, right? Which I didn't even know that was a position, but that's what I am. He stepped in to take on some of the roles of the desky lead to communicate with the front desk on how to administer the election. But in the last election, I went to the deskies many times and said, "Hey, has anyone voted?"
Last election was not handled well.
This is just a couple months ago, you know, or like 6 months ago when I was elected. I would ask, "Hey, how has anyone voted?" And they were like, "There's an election," and I was like, "Oh wow, okay."
Well, if people don't tell the deskies things, that's, you know, whatever, but like.
But it's also whose responsibility is it to sort of manage all this?
But
Not technically not. Like the election commissioner, based on what I've read of what someone wrote down in a Google Doc at one point, that's not within the scope of their job. They're supposed to be communicating with like I think the desky lead, but for whatever reason, you know, like there's a lot of ins and outs.
regardless,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I think a lot of it will be helped if we could get the wiki up and running or some kind of communication up and running for things. That would be great.
Definitely,
But
Yeah.
also, I have a suggestion for you as a board member.
please.
If you were saying like, I don't know how to interact with the deskies about this or that or whatever, then first of all, I encourage you to come to a new member orientation because we talk about that. And also I encourage you, if the people who have recently been elected to the board and to the two of you, if you get elected, please sign yourself up for a new member orientation. We answer questions like this. It's really helpful. And also you can tell us what you want us to do differently. Or at least give us feedback, you know, if there's things you want us to emphasize on, but like, you know, that's why we have them, right? To try and set some norms and policies.
Are there any events where there is a mass amount of deskies? Like, do you all have meetings together as like a large group or?
We do. I mean, there was a lull when we were in between leads, but like, yes, I mean, you should talk to Sun Young about the exact frequency, but there are meetings for deskies, and honestly, I think the deskies are the best organized group, like, out of any group of volunteers here, so I think like.
Say louder.
No, I mean, I'm a deskie, I'm saying that as a deskie, but like, you know, I mean, there's definitely been problems at points, but that doesn't mean that the system isn't working. The system works, it's just, you know, nothing is perfect, but
Right.
like,
The next meeting is on the 12th December.
there you go.
December
It's-
12th?
Yeah, it's like every month or every 2 weeks or something, depending on what the current schedule.
That definitely sends me a message. But like, yeah, I feel like that would be cool to have more sort of interaction with.
Yeah, I mean, the deskies are always eager to have more information.
And as far as member orientation, and this is, I guess, a PSA for everyone, when are member orientations?
We have a link. If you email the front desk, they will email you the link and you can sign up.
Okay, is it posted anywhere or
It's
is?
on Eventbrite, but it is not on the public Eventbrite because we're having a lot of problems with randos coming.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah, so just ask the front desk, they will send you the link right now.
so to be clear, if anyone wants to come to a new member orientation, they should email the front desk
And it's
And-
free?
and then they can go, but they can't, it's not posted on the Eventbrite.
No,
Publicly.
it's not, I mean, it's a judgment call. It was originally public, it was originally private, and then it was public, and then we were having, I don't know, so whatever. I'm not sure there's one good answer.
No, this is yet another one of the little bits of minutia that we all deal with here.
Right, like I would love for it to be public, but like it does create more work for people
Right.
if we do it that way. So,
Thank you for that. All right, well, I have gone through all of the questions that I had for y'all. If nobody else has any more questions, and if nobody on Zoom has any questions, then I'm gonna let y'all sort of outro yourselves. Any last thoughts, feelings?
I think I've gotten it all out there, but I appreciate anybody's vote. Happy to run. Running next time. If I'm not if I don't win this time, you'll see me next time.
Cool.
Uh, let's see. Yeah, I guess I'm running because I need this place to exist. And so, if I can throw more time at it and energy at it to make sure that Artisans is successful and around, then that's what I'm doing. And that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half, 2 years. I need it. So,
Awesome. Mike, Matt, appreciate it,
Thanks, Bobby,
yeah.
for moderating.
of course. And to everyone out there, thank you very much for attending. Have a great night.
Thanks, Dave.
good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.